All right, buckle up. We begin this morning with a Fox News alert from President Donald Trump vowing to fight back after being removed from the GOP primary ballot in Colorado. The state Supreme Court ruling that Trump violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution because of January the 6th.
The Colorado Supreme Court confirmed that the district court got it right, that he did engage in insurrection. I think Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has to apply to the presidency, because if not, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Literally, Jack Smith, who would charge Donald Trump with absolutely everything, including jaywalking if he could get away with it, didn't even charge Donald Trump or most of the rioters on January 6th with insurrection.
Presidential candidate and former Governor Ron DeSantis and current Florida Governor Ron DeSantis calling it an abuse of power, and the U.S. Supreme Court should reverse the decision.
And the White House hopeful, Vivek Ramaswamy, taking things a step further. Listen to this, saying, I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot until Trump is also allowed to be on the ballot. The former president spoke yesterday in Iowa.
They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. And in the end, they're not after me, they're after you. I just happen to be standing in their way.
Well, the Trump campaign team wants to have the matter settled by the U.S. Supreme Court before a January 5th deadline, if he wants to be on the ballot in Colorado. Let's bring in Andrew Cherkansky, a former federal prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. Andrew, good morning to you.
Good morning. What a wild turn of events.
Yeah. Okay. Now, this only pertains to one state, and it only pertains to their primary election. But with the Supreme Court deciding it, this is going to apply to all the states.
Well, there are dozens of other states that are evaluating this same issue. So I think that the decision in the state of Colorado is something that the Supreme Court has to weigh in on, because at the end of the day, this is a question of a political nature. Who is going to be the next president of the United States? Is that a question for the people of this great country, or is that a question?
Tie 133 pages, and then you have the three dissents, which I'm trying to work my way through here. From what you've seen, what do you take away?
So the way I see this is that the Supreme Court has to take this. They can stay the dates in Colorado. They'll move expeditiously. I was struck by the majority opinion and the amount of verbiage devoted to the sort of straw man arguments. The real key issue in this case is Trump an officer of the United States in the context in which that term is used in Article 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
And in 2010, Chief Justice Roberts explained in Free Enterprise that people don't vote for officers of the United States. Article 2, officers of the United States, is commonly understood in the Constitution to refer to appointed officials. And to the extent that the president or the vice president are included as an officer or included within the admonitions of the Constitution, they are typically highlighted, like in the impeachment clause, which specifically says president, vice president. So I think this case will be handled quickly. I think it could be 9-0 in the Supreme Court for Trump.
And can I just say, Ty, that would be, I had to emphasize, I don't ever like talking about who appointed whom, because you like to just believe in the impartiality of justice. But nonetheless, it has become important. So because Trump's already pointing out, the Colorado Supreme Court, they were all appointed by Democrats. Okay, sure. It's a 4-3 ruling. They didn't all rule against you. A Supreme Court, where we often hear about how politicized it is. And I know we're looking into the distance here, but if you're looking at 9-0, that will sure be a statement.
Yeah, I think I do believe it could be 9-0 because I think the law is clear. And as you'll recall, I was once an advocate of this position. There have been multiple law review articles, the most prominent by Bill Vaught and his colleague. I was on a panel with Professor Vaught at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics discussing this, and heard his views. And his scholarship is excellent. On the other hand, there are multiple competing scholars who disagree and highlight the point that I just made about the multiple Supreme Court decisions, which are 3, that do not conclude that officers, as used in the context, as this context, are include the president or the vice president. And
welcome to what is this? Wednesday edition of Straight Outta Politics. I'm your host for today. I'm CJ, that's short for Compton J, or J in real life. Let me just make sure my sound is good. I got this new mic and I'm going to turn up my volume on my TV so I can hear myself. Okay, it sounds fine. If there's any audio issues, please let me know. I got this new mic. As everybody knows, we had the fundraiser for new equipment. I still haven't gotten a laptop because I like to do my research for a bigger item like that. But I got this mic already. Much appreciated for those that donated. But let's get into the story. And there's a lot of shit to cover on this topic, but there's no way I can cover all of the opinions. There's no way I can cover all of the footage. All of the sort of punditry that has been going on. So I tried to pick out some that's making a point that's not about just red and blue fighting. Let's get to the details of the case and let's see what this is about. And what most people, there's a lot of things that most Americans, I would say 90 plus up range Americans, don't have any idea what the Constitution says or has any understanding of the language in the Constitution if you just read it as a layperson. So like with this guy, this is former Trump lawyer Ty Cobb. He's saying that it's been commonly understood that the word officers in the context of this section of the Constitution has always been understood that the officers meant appointed people, not elected. And the reason I wanted to zero in on that first is because that is quite logical to have that sort of understanding of the word officer in this context, because understand the 14th Amendment was written after the Civil War to prevent Confederates, people who actually had an insurrection, who took up arms and fought a war against their government. That's an actual insurrection. So it was to prevent them. So when you think about it, at that time, you write this law, you go, okay, if one of these people is able to go through the process of being elected, campaigning, talking to their constituents, you can be elected, no problem. But what you can't do is have a person who's elected and say, hey, there's this guy who would never be elected because he of his Confederate beliefs, who he still has. I can't appoint this person that doesn't go through the process of an election where the people can determine. So to me, the interpretation of the word officers in this context would make logical sense. And that's how I like to analyze things. It's like, let's go back to that time, what was going on, and try to logically conclude, what would you do? What would you do at that time with this context at that time? And to me, that seems very logical, because as a democracy, even if somebody who is a militia is it against the government, if they go through a process by which their community wants to vote them as a representative, that should still be allowed, in my opinion. You're going through the process and you're not skipping. Americans have said, hey, I like you. I like what you're saying. I want to vote for you to represent me. That should not be prevented, in my opinion. So just to start there. Like I said, there's a lot to cover. I'm going to let him make a couple of more points because he does in this video. And then I'm going to get to some other receipts.
And there have been many constitutional professors, Steve Calabrese of Northwestern, probably the most prominent one, who, after reading all the scholarship, changed his mind. He was originally a supporter of the idea that this outcome was appropriate, but he later concluded, despite his strong feelings against Trump, that Trump would have to be beaten at the ballot box. And I think, sadly, that's the case. And it will be a race to get there. I mean, the Supreme Court, though, will not hesitate to move quickly on this. They know what the stakes are. They know what their responsibility is.
Right.
And they can delay some of these Colorado dates to the extent that they feel they're obligated to or have to.
Right now, and obviously his name remains on the ballot until they rule one way or the other.
Right.
That was one of the predicates of the ruling today out of Colorado. You hear the music, Ty. That music is from Trump's rally in Waterloo, Iowa. He's there and he's on stage, and right now he's basking in the music and the crowd, and then he'll obviously speak. Now we have this statement, but I think that when I just said to David Axelrod that a Republican in another swing state who is dealing with some of these issues comment was that this ruling would supercharge the extremists.
This ruling will supercharge the extremists. Now, I wouldn't use the word extremists. They're saying people who are loyal to Trump. And it absolutely will. This is the first reaction. Now, this broke yesterday while Nick and I were live. So we covered literally the first hour that it broke. We were able to kind of talk about it, but not at all in detail. But this is amazing to me. But let me let him finish making a point here, and then we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, in the music and the crowd, and then he'll obviously speak. Now we have this statement, but I think that when I
mentioned the stream yesterday without mentioning commenting on them saying this will supercharge the base. This will absolutely supercharge the base. Like it's almost like the Democrats are saying, how can we make Trump's base even more angry so they're more resolved to support Trump? What I don't get is after the 91 charges, nothing is working to dissuade people who support him. It's only making him worse. I believe having this happen right before the Iowa caucus, let's see what the poll numbers do next week. It'll take a couple of days to get real actual poll numbers. They'll do these little temporary polls to kind of get a quick pulse. But the polls that's going to be over several days, which will be coming out next week, those are the polls I want to see. I guarantee there will be a jump, and he's already raising money off this. I don't understand this logic from the Democrats.
And I just said to David Axelrod that a Republican in another swing state who is dealing with some of these issues comment was that this ruling would supercharge the extremists. You know, what do you think? As he walks out there, is this something he sees as basically a win in a certain sense?
Oh, totally. This vindicates his insistence that this is a political conspiracy to interfere with the election, and that,
which I agree with. But this is something I thought when he was saying that the things that they're doing to Trump is having a reaction like Trump is a rapper. Maybe this is a stand-up joke. Like Trump is a rapper. Because what gives rappers more street cred than getting arrested and going to jail? Tupac went to jail and came out with a double CD. Nigga, that shit was fire. Anyway, that's a side note. But Tupac went to jail, came out with Me Against the World. That shit went viral. Millions of copies sold, double CD. He was kind of the start of the double CD thing that happened with hip hop at the time, but it's very, very, very similar to that, where in the Black community in particular, and I was saying also the subculture of the hip hop culture of the Black community, this is very much the case, because it's like the underdog. They almost give him like an underdog sort of feel, which to me is why this is having this sort of boomerang effect from what they're trying to actually accomplish here.
That that he's the target, and people shouldn't tolerate that in America. It's doodah, but that's the way he tries to sell this. Now the reality is he committed these crimes in 2021. The Jack Smith's only been on the job for 13 months at most. So this is, justice has moved relatively speedy. This hasn't been stalled to attack the election.
No, it is though. I didn't mean.
All right, we're gonna pause here. I'm gonna bring up the next receipt. Actually, I guess I'll go to my history here. You see a bunch of kids' videos. This is my daughters that watch. My youngest daughter. All right, so this one here, because this is so despicable by cable news. So this ruling is easily going to be overturned. There's no way that this is going to. I mean, there's so many issues with this ruling that this is going to be easily overturned. Like Todd Cobb said, it's going to be overturned like probably 9-0, like the Democrats. And the thing is, on all, like they keep bringing on these guests from MSNBC and CNN who are regular sort of legal expert that they bring on, who's always talking about, who's always going with the Democratic establishment narrative about January 6th, about the insurrection. But those same people are now going, nah, this is not going to stand. This is not going to stand. Come on, get the fuck out of here, man. This is absurd. And they say that in this video here. I'm going to play the first 2 minutes, and then I'm going to fast forward to the debate.
Trump's Republican rivals for the presidential nomination, they are quickly coming to his defense.
I will beat him fair and square. We don't need to have judges making these decisions. We need voters to make these decisions.
I do not believe Donald Trump should be prevented from being president of the United States by any court. I think he should be prevented from being president of the United States by the voters of this country.
I will withdraw. I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot unless and until Trump's name is restored.
This is a historic level of accountability for.
So you heard Vivek there. Vivek, and that guy has got to get a job in the Trump administration, because he coddled his scrotum so tightly. Vivek Ramaswamy, he's gonna get a job. I cannot not see him. Is that the right way? I can't. He's gonna get a job in the Trump administration. But let's continue.
for January 6th and for Donald Trump's actions on January 6th. Now, as you mentioned, this is probably not the final word because Donald Trump will appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. But for this moment in time, this is a huge dose of accountability and a punishment for January 6th. The Colorado Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision ruling that Donald Trump engaged in the insurrection, that the insurrectionist ban in the 14th Amendment applies to the presidency, and that he is ineligible to hold any future office.
There's a lot of things he said there. Just preposterous shit.
The 14th Amendment applies to the presidency, and that he is
I mean, this is an obvious thing here. And this is so let me let him play it. I'm gonna actually combat each one because he makes, I think, 3 points here.
But
and
for
I'm gonna
this
address each
for
one.
January 6th and for Donald Trump's actions on January 6th. Now, as you mentioned, this is probably not the final word because Donald Trump will appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. But for this moment in time, this is a huge dose of accountability and a punishment for January 6th. The Colorado Supreme Court, in a 4-3 decision ruling that Donald Trump engaged in the insurrection.
Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection.
That the insurrectionist ban in the 14th Amendment applies to the president.
How can a state court make a determination about the Constitution? They cannot. Like, this is easy. You don't got to go to a law school. This is easy. How can a state court make a determination about a federal provision or law or the Constitution? How is that possible?
The presidency, and that he is ineligible to hold any future office. That's the finding from the majority opinion.
Now, that's the finding. So the obvious question will be, when and who made the determination that Donald Trump committed an insurrection? That's one. And then two, when did Donald Trump take arms and go up to the Capitol to do anything? Do you think when this was written that it was written specifically for the Confederate? The Confederate didn't say, hey, we want to do an insurrection. The Confederacy or the Confederate Army, they did one. So to me, like, this doesn't even apply to Trump because he's not the one who physically did anything. There's so many different levels of why this is going to fall. And then the other thing that we cannot act like is not the case, January 6th has federal officers involved. There has to be an explanation for that. There has to be an addressing for that, in my opinion, before any real determination can be given about whether an insurrection or not happened. Great point. All right, let's get back to the video.
Let me read for you a quote, a pretty searing quote, where they hammered Trump for his conduct that day. The justices wrote, quote, President Trump did not merely incite the insurrection. Even when the siege on the Capitol was fully underway, he continued to support it by repeatedly demanding that Vice.
Again, when was this adjudicated that this is now fact? When did this was never adjudicated? And we're going to get to where they're even basing this on. And that's the January 6th Commission, the partisan Democrat January 6th Commission. Get the fuck out of here. This is gonna fall easily.
Vice President Mike Pence refused to perform his constitutional duty, and by calling senators to persuade them to stop the counting of electoral votes. These actions constituted overt, voluntary, and direct participation.
I don't see how that's an insurrection. Don't count the votes. That's an insurrection to you? This is not going to stand. I'm going to forward it to this debate now. They started with the clown who said all the nonsense, and now they moved to the debate part. And I'll wait till they get to the point to make my point.
Joining us now to discuss, CNN senior political analyst John Avlon, CNN political analyst and historian Leah Wright-Rigueur, and CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. I want to drill into the legal pieces of this in a moment, but to start, to Marshall's point, there's not a lot of case law here. I don't think there's any. To some degree, there is no precedent for this. This is unquestionably historic. We've had 12, 14 hours to digest this. What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts are split into two camps. The first is that we shouldn't get overexcited, that this is just, I think it doesn't necessarily mean that Trump's ruled out. It's clear that the Supreme Court, I think, of the United States will probably take up this case. This may mean just a setback. We may even see Trump on the ballot if the Supreme Court takes up the case before January 5th, which is the day for certification of candidates on the ballot. But on the other hand, it is historic because it is a preview of what is to come. That this is something that is part of this kind of these ideas about insurrection, about overthrowing democracy, about accountability that is all stemming from the Trump presidency and January 6th. This is, I think, a defining case in terms of thinking about how these things are going to play out over the course of not only the next year and this next presidential election, but also even beyond that. So it's opening the door for other cases. It's opening the door for the courts to establish what does it mean to be an insurrectionist? What does it mean for the presidency, a person who is in the office of the presidency, to take part in an insurrection? Does that amount to disqualifying in some way, shape, or form? And it's going to force not only the...
Now, the guy that's cheating on the left, he has been tasked with the position of pretending like this is a legitimate thing. So the guy that's on the left and the guy that's on the far right next to the woman that's speaking with the white top, these are the regular legal scholars that they bring. These two men that are closest to the screen, not the anchor. These are the two legal, and they're going to be arguing opposite sides, and it feels like one is serious and one is not. You know what I mean? It's like when you have a debate in school and you're assigned a position that's not your position, but you still have to argue the position. That's what it feels like the guy on the left is doing, and then a guy on the right is having to reluctantly defend Trump based on actual law. You know what I mean? So let's listen.
The courts of this country to make a decision, but also the American public.
The real question here, Ellie, also is this is a procedural decision. The district court already said a finding of fact that the former president engaged in an insurrection. Right. But this court is taking it one step further and reading Section 3 of the 14th.
She's saying they keep doing this where they're saying there's courts that already has found it a fact. They have not found it a fact based on any trial. They found it a fact based on the January 6th commission. They basically taken their paperwork and say, oh, okay, we're just going to go off what they said, which is preposterous. But let's continue.
The 14th Amendment, a way that no court has so far.
Yeah, and here's where I think the problem comes in with the ruling we got from the Colorado Supreme Court yesterday. Even if we take it as a given that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection, and I'm willing to...
Now, understand, this is the clown, is their regular legal expert that you see the most on TV. He's the one that's most willing to delve into the culture war. He's the that's most willing to buy into the January 6th nonsense. That's this guy. He has to actually say what reality is, and then, which is not good for their audience. That's why they got to have this counter guy on there who's just saying ridiculous shit. But let's go.
To sign on to that, given all the facts, I think quite clearly, we still don't know, even as we sit here now, we don't know how this works. We don't know who gets to decide whether a person engaged in insurrection. We didn't know 100 years ago. We didn't know yesterday. We don't know now. The problem is the Constitution tells us how we're supposed to.
Right. Now, the point that he made, that we don't know who gets to decide who has committed an insurrection. So the January 6th committee doesn't have any power ordained by them by the Constitution that gives them the authority to make a claim, to make a determination, I mean. So let's let him continue.
Supposed to know. The 14th Amendment says, Section 5, Congress is supposed to pass laws telling us how this works. Congress has not done that. And so what Colorado did is...
Did you hear what he said? In this Section 5 of this amendment, Insurrection Amendment, it says that Congress is supposed to make these determinations on how to determine if somebody has committed an insurrection. They've never done that. They've never actually created those laws.
They sort of made up this procedure. They had this quasi-hearing over 5.
So this is the part that I really want you guys to hear. Let me rewind it so you can hear the full sentence that he says here.
In 5, Congress is supposed to pass laws telling us how this works. Congress has not done that. And so what Colorado did is they sort of made up this procedure. They had this quasi-hearing over 5 days. And now the Supreme Court of Colorado, by a 4-3 margin, is saying, good enough, he's out. That is a violation.
Do you hear how you hear how he's talking? A quasi hearing, and the way he's describing the Colorado Supreme Court as if there's a bunch of morons. This is a guy who's their analyst. This is a CNN analyst who's saying this. But let me say, let him say it again, and then let the other guy speak. And
they sort of made up this procedure. They had this quasi-hearing over 5 days. And now the Supreme Court of Colorado, by a 4-3 margin, is saying, good enough, he's out. That is a violation of due process. And that is why I think that this ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court is going to be struck down by the...
So this is what we're talking, to me, the main point that we're talking about is due process. We're not jumping to, this was an insurrection, one, and Trump participated in insurrection. We're not jumping there. Due process is what's going to get us to those answers, or have us answer those questions. Now, let's let the unserious guy on the left, that's when he's going to chime in now.
Supreme Court is going to be struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Avalon, I want you to respond, but we'll get to 3 of the justices on the court dissented because of due process concerns.
Well, but also because there have been a lot of roadblocks in this effort based on a lot of people finding technicalities. The Constitution says what it says. The Colorado Supreme Court decided that
the whole justice system, the whole system of law in the United States is based on technicalities, fuckface. That is the whole fucking premise. You go into court and you say you file a motion. Isn't that a technicality, fuckface? The reason I have this sort of tone for this particular guy, I don't like when these people on TV, these professional managerial class, speak in a way as if they're experts when they're omitting information for the audience. So because you think you're smart, you have your law degree, you want to fool people who don't understand the law in the way that you do. That I don't find that to be admirable at all. I find it to be pretty despicable to me. But let's let him make his point.
There have been a lot of roadblocks in this effort based on a lot of people finding technicalities. The Constitution says what it says. The Colorado Supreme Court decided that the Constitution still matters and it applies to Donald Trump. The 14th Amendment, Section 3 specifically says, we had the language up there, that no person who took an oath to uphold the Constitution and engages in insurrection or rebellion or gives aid or comfort to said insurrection or rebellion is eligible to hold any office. That's the language.
So he would be considered the one that gave aid or comfort. Now, let's go back to the text here. This is what the cable news does a lot. Because the average American layperson who reads this, or even the Constitution, or even just reads this, you know what you're going to do? You're going to read it in the context of your current. So you're going to read even the definitions of the word in the current context. So if you're reading the word officer, you're reading it how you understand it today. not how it was meant when it was written. Let's continue. This is easily
to hold any office.
Down. I'm
That's
not
the
even a
language.
lawyer.
Any office, civil or federal. And people can parse, well, was it anticipated to be under a president? I know if you read the articles, the debates around the ratification, senators at that time are saying this is also forward-looking. This is not just about the Confederacy and the U.S. Civil War. I take Ellie's points. He and I've had a long, vigorous.
Nobody's saying that there was only one insurrection that this could apply to. The problem is you are jumping to step 5, saying that we already have determined that this is an insurrection, and that has not been established. That's the due process part.
Agreement about the application of this. But the Constitution exists for a reason. And if people keep looking for loopholes to excuse Donald Trump for accountability against the Constitution, that's where you reap the whirlwind. This is not partisan. This is about applying historic principles.
Due process is not a loophole. Due process is in Section 1.
Due process. To these two guys, this is like a law school setting. Law school, they have these sort of debates where you're one person is arguing on one side. It's your friends. You're in a class. I only know this because I've been to several law classes with a friend of mine that was in school at the time, years ago, more than 10, maybe 15, 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. But let's continue here. So they're just here, very similar to their, back in the days, a law school setting where they're just, arguing points. But if you look at this guy on the left's demeanor, body language, I don't believe he believes what he's saying at all.
Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. By the way, when Donald Trump lost dozens of his elections.
Hold on. He made another point that I didn't go all the way back for him to make here. Sorry for that. So, because he does make a good point.
That's where you reap the whirlwind. This is not partisan. This is about applying historic principles.
Due process is not a loophole. Due process is in Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. By the way, when Donald Trump lost dozens of his election suits in 2020, what did Donald Trump's people say? Oh, those are technicalities. Those are loopholes. Those matter. Due process matters. We can't just throw it out.
But this is not. I respectfully, I don't think this is an issue of due process. This is an issue about whether.
How can this not be an issue of due process? That's the question. Now let's let him answer.
Whether Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection.
This is a question about whether Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. That's called due process. How do you determine that without due process?
And whether, therefore, the constitutional remedy for that applies. And I think people are going to put all sorts of partisan spin on the ball, and I'd encourage them not to. Shouldn't cheerlead this from the left, and you shouldn't deny it from the right. If you believe, I'll say, philosophical consistency is going to hold the day, then any originalist on the court would say, well, the text of the Constitution matters, and states' rights matters with regard to Colorado. Listen to Judge Ludick. Read the 74-page document by the two Federal Society jurists, legal scholars, who went to this impartially and said, you know what? It does apply when you look at the full context.
No, this guy is saying a whole lot of nonsense. Now, this ruling out of the Colorado Supreme Court, 200 pages. 200. Do you know not until page 69 do they even start talking about this shit? The first 68 pages is talking about the Colorado state violations. Like the laws, the Colorado laws that were violated by this. That's what the first section of this is even about. Which to me, it makes it problematic, and it also illustrates why you shouldn't even be a state shouldn't be making this determination. But I've gone too long on that point. Let's go to Twitter for a couple of other small receipts here, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. This is interesting to me from the point of arguing law. In another life, I was a lawyer. Excuse me. Here. A couple other receipts, reactions, some tweets. Yeah, man. This is gonna be a doozy. So let's try to get through these. It's gonna be a little bit of a doozy. So let's get some reaction. This is Vivek Ramaswamy. Of course, he is vying for a position in the Trump cabinet. So let's listen to Vivek's reaction, all of these reactions are like 2 minutes long. So we're going to probably do 4 or 5 of these 2-minute reactions.
They have just tried to bar President Trump from the Colorado ballot using an unconstitutional maneuver that is a bastardization of the 14th Amendment to our U.S. Constitution. This was a provision, Section 3, that was designed to bar Confederate members, people who switched to the Confederacy, from actually being able to serve. That's very different than what's at issue here, to say the least. This is a hollowed out husk of what the country was built on. The basic principle that we, the people, select our leadership, not the unelected elite class in the back of palace halls. That's old world Europe, not the United States. That's why I'm making a pledge today that I will withdraw. I pledge to withdraw from the Colorado GOP primary ballot unless and until Trump's name is restored. And I demand that Ron DeSantis and Chris Christie and Nikki Haley do the same thing, or else these Republicans are simply complicit in this unconstitutional attack on the way we conduct our constitutional republic. I refuse to be complicit in that. I think what they're doing is wrong. And I think it's up to Republicans to step up and stand up with a spine for our country's future. That's really what's at stake, whether we, the people, actually have a say in deciding who leads this country. Yes, it would be easier for other Republicans like me who are running in this race to say, hey, if Trump is sidelined, there's our opportunity. No doubt other candidates are probably privately celebrating with their corporate sponsors. That's not the right thing to do. I think the most useful thing that every GOP candidate can do right now is to join me in that pledge. I'll say that I will withdraw from that Colorado GOP primary ballot until Trump's name is restored. This belongs to the people, not to the unelected Democratic cabal of judges in Colorado or any other state. And I demand that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie do the same thing, or else they're complicit in what this security state is trying to do to shut down Trump. I stand by that, and I expect them to do the right thing.
This guy is a top sales guy.
They have just tried to bar.
It's like he's a top salesman. That's what he does. I'm gonna skip over the Jesse Waters video. It's a little long. No, if I have time for that. We're gonna get some more reaction. Here goes Ellie. How do you say his name? Anyway, let's play it, and then here goes some MSNBC reaction. So I got conservatives and I got blue and red reaction. Let me just put it that way.
What's your first thought about this headed to SCOTUS?
Why do you think the conservatives would overturn Colorado? I mean, woo, states' rights, brother. I mean, isn't that what the conservatives usually look? Of course, the Supreme Court is going to weigh in and likely overturn the Colorado State Supreme Court's interpretation of Colorado state law, because the conservatives on the Supreme Court, who usually go on and on and on about states' rights, are hypocrites, and they are comfortable being hypocrites, and they will be hypocritical in this situation.
It's so disingenuous to make this point about Republicans saying their states' rights. They do lean on that a lot. But to pretend that this issue falls under that is ridiculous. This is an issue, like states there can't be different rules. There can't be different standards between states. Could you imagine if this was a continue? We have 5 states that don't got Trump, 4 states over there that don't got Biden, 8 states over there that don't, like, national elections. The way you do your elections is what is states' rights. Like whether it's a caucus or whether it's a primary, that's states' rights. But who's on the ballot, especially not especially, but who's on the ballot, that to me should not be a states' rights thing. And I don't think anyone would say that this is a national election. It's disingenuous to me to make that point, but it's specifically from this guy here.
Situation, and they will overturn Colorado's own state court process, but they shouldn't. And when you're talking about writing this decision and what it must be like for the state court judge, I would like to point out that they were so aware of what SCOTUS was about to do in terms of bending over backwards that they literally quote Neil Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch, when he was sitting on the federal circuit in Colorado, they quote Gorsuch for the opinion that Colorado gets to decide its own rules about who is qualified or not for the ballot in Colorado. That's a Gorsuch opinion that they quote in the thing. So if Gorsuch had any logical consistency, he would likely uphold the Colorado State Court opinion. But what we're about to see is just how again, hypocritical and unserious the Supreme Court is when it comes to protecting their partisan sugar daddies like Donald Trump.
Yeah, let me read from that, because we only saw this because of you pointing it out. So credit where due. They send this up to judge. You know, they know that Justice Gorsuch will almost certainly weigh on this. They say, as then Judge Gorsuch recognized in Hassan, this is the case they're citing, it is a state's legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical functioning of the political process that, quote, permits it to exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. Judge,
they're laughing, but they do this all, and I've been saying this a lot in this segment. It's like, they're like, you're skipping to step 5 again, because even in the reading of this, it says ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited. You haven't established that yet. That's what the due process is going to do. It's terrible. Anyway? So let me say that again. So let's read it. As then Judge Gorsuch recognized, it is, quote, a state's legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical functioning of the political process that permits it to exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. You are skipping to step 5 without establishing who decides to say that he is constitutionally prohibited. That's the part that you get. You're not telling to your audience, and you're giggling by omitting that sort of point.
Judge Cordell, I imagine you have the same interpretation that this is not an accident to quote Judge Gorsuch.
No, it's not
to possible Justice Gorsuch in possible Supreme Court review.
Yeah, these justices know who their audience is, and their audience is the Supreme Court. They know this is headed that way.
This is like, anyway, I'm not going to give that analogy. YouTube is not going to like that. YouTube is not going to like that one. So let's go to some more reaction. Oh, this is the Lincoln Project. This is the video, the 15-second video they put out. Let's
Will the
watch
following
this
candidates please
video.
report to Colorado? Nikki Haley, Ronald DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie. If you did not hear your name called, please direct all concerns to the Colorado Supreme Court. Or, cry about it. Will the following candidates please...
You see how this is not serious? It's just about getting under his skin.
Will the following candidates please report to Colorado? Nikki Haley, Ronald DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie. If you did not hear your name called, please direct all concerns to the Colorado Supreme Court. Or, cry about it.
Completely unserious Lincoln Project. Now, even if you would think, oh, how can you get even more unserious than Lincoln Project? And then my answer to that would be Keith Olbermann. All right, let me read it. You prepare yourself for this video, everybody. Colorado disqualifies Trump on anniversary of will be wild insurrection tweet. SCOTUS has only 17 days to overrule. Trump again quotes Hitler while flexing. I've never read Mein Kampf. He read a different Hitler book. Yeah, he jumped around because he's Keith Olbermann, and he's crazy. Keith Olbermann almost seems like a cartoon character, like he is trying to be cartoonish. It's not like he is being genuine and then he just looks cartoony. It looks like he's trying to be over the top. Let's listen to this nonsense here from this guy.
Get the Wednesday Countdown podcast, because not only has the Colorado State Supreme Court defended the 14th Amendment and the Constitution and the patriots who died defending it during the Civil War, not only has it disqualified Trump from being on that state's presidential and primary ballots, but it has started the clock ticking on the beginning of the end for the Supreme Court, either the end of the Supreme Court's partisan crooked corruption or the end of its role in America. If the Supreme Court wants to overrule Colorado, it must indicate it is willing to do so within 17 days, and 6 of those days are Saturdays, Sundays, and/or court holidays. Oh, and another issue of timing, the ruling in Colorado comes on quite an anniversary. Think Be There, Will Be Wild. Meanwhile, Trump continues to go crazy and morph totally and rapidly into Adolf Hitler. The migrants coming across the country, he said in Iowa last night, are, quote, destroying the blood of our country. They're destroying the fabric of our country. Plus, Trump's imbecilic denial, quote, I never read Mein Kampf. That's not the flex you think it is, Dementia J. The book Ivana said was on his bedside table all those years was not Mein Kampf. It was My New Order, Hitler's book of his favorite speeches. All that and more on the Wednesday Countdown podcast, now live wherever you podcast.
How anybody can stomach Keith Olbermann is quite astonishing to me. Let me see what RBN members are saying here. Okay, no, it's not for me. I'm going to rewind it because I do want to kind of address a couple of things he says here. So
who died defending it during the Civil War. Not only has it disqualified Trump from being on that state's presidential and primary ballots, but it has started the clock ticking on the beginning of the end for the Supreme Court.
This part, the beginning of the end of the Supreme Court. So Keith Olbermann is already setting up that if they rule against it, you guys are a clown court, even if they rule against it based in law, like, you know, due process. This guy is clownish. He makes another point I want to talk
about. Either the end of the Supreme Court's partisan crooked corruption or the end of its role in America.
The end of its role in America. Now, how are you going to bring to an end the role of the Supreme Court, Keith Olbermann? How is that going to happen? Now, he does say it could be the end of the partisanship, and it would be an end if it's a 9-0 verdict. Wouldn't you say, Keith? Let's go to a couple of more, and then, like I said, there's a lot to cover, and this is maybe half of the stuff. This guy here makes a great point. Here is Frank Luntz, and let's listen to what he says here.
Frank, what do you think the impact of this ruling will be on their support for him?
It's going to be exactly what the indictments did. It's going to be exactly what the criticisms have done. Donald Trump thrives on negativity. He thrives on legal systems that try to hold him accountable. And I'm convinced that his polling numbers are going to go up.
Yep.
Just today, the New York Times published 6 key swing states and had Donald Trump up beyond the margin of error in 5 out of the 6. The polling earlier a month ago was significant. Trump is gaining. The more that he is prosecuted, the more that he is condemned, the higher his numbers go as people rally around him. And I would say to the judges, as I said to the Justice Department, you're actually making it more likely that Donald Trump is elected next November.
Is the point I've been saying. It's having the effects that it would have on a rapper like Tupac. Tupac gets arrested, he goes to jail, he come out, he's more beloved. It's having the same effect as a rapper being criminally charged for anything.
By how you are pursuing.
I'm not going to say anything besides in its sexual nature, because it's not having an effect with, for example, Puff Daddy. So not anything excluding sexual behavior.
You don't explain the decisions. You don't put things in context. And so Trump climbs and climbs and climbs. And right now, he's beating Joe Biden clearly nationwide.
Well, for the judges would say, look, we're just going by the law without fear of favor. And I mean, but does the context even matter to Trump supporters? Because there have been, tonight's ruling was really lengthy, explaining point by point why they believe he incited the insurrection, why the 14th Amendment applies to him. But to the average Trump supporter, does that context even matter? Is this more about, once again, Trump is the victim of the deep state kind of thinking?
It actually proves Trump's point. It proves that the people in charge, the people in power, are trying to take him down. But you're not trying to reach all the Trump voters. You're simply trying to reach 3 or 4% of them that will make a difference in this election. Now, make no mistake, there's very few undecided voters right now. There are very few people going back and forth between Trump and Biden. It's more about those people are trying to decide whether or not to vote. And I got to tell you, Nikki Haley was gaining and gaining and gaining.
That's
every single
over.
Day, but she's going to be lost in the coverage for the next few days,
that's over
maybe
now.
for the next couple of weeks. As Trump turns this to his advantage, he is the best victim politician I have ever seen in my 35 years in doing this. And this is exactly what he would have wanted in the run-up to the Iowa caucus.
Very quickly, because it's
this is about the flip.
Polls, how many people who sat out in 2020 are now saying they're going to vote and they're going to vote for Trump? So you think this just sort of supercharges that, right? It's going to just bring more people out to vote for him who maybe sat out before.
And the state that blew me away was Nevada, because that's a state with a significant percentage of Latino votes. Trump has been screaming about illegal immigration, and Nevada seems to be rewarding him for the language that he uses and for the intensity of his message. If Nevada's going this much for Trump, that ought to send you a big signal about what's happening in America today.
All right, Frank Luntz, thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll end with this video here, and I guess that's spot on. It's having an opposite effect. It's having a boomerang effect, and they don't have anything else to do. They don't have any other tools in their toolbox, so this is all they know to do. They're not going to change up from this. Actually, I'll just bring that back up, and I'll come out of it instead of starting all over. But we're going to move to the next topic, and that next topic is, let's go to this here, Israeli settlers, unhinged Israeli settlers, and let me put up the banner. Unhinged Israeli settlers. This report from, I think you say Christian Kapoor. I think that's how you say her name, Christian Kapoor. Christiane Amopour. I'm sorry. But this tweet from Kim Iverson is how I came about it. And this is what she says. This is exactly what I saw in the West Bank back in the fall of 2019. Kim went to visit Palestine in the West Bank. And she's saying this is exactly what she saw. And now let's go to the tweet by Christiane. I think that's how you say her name. Amopour. And she says in her latest report, documents how West Bank settlers are escalating attacks on Palestinians despite calls from President Biden for Israel to sanction settler extremism. So this, I think she's going to be reporting on the full report this weekend upcoming, but let's listen to some of this reporting about unhinged Israeli settlers in the West Bank.
We stop at a service station in the occupied Palestinian West Bank. A man in military fatigues demands to check our IDs.
I have the right to secure this area, and I need to check who you are and what you're doing here.
He has no identifying insignia, won't tell us who he is, but he's got a gun. So we oblige. We're confused, and we're not the only ones. CNN obtained this video from inside Hebron, a divided city, filmed a few days after the Hamas October 7 attack.
You hear what now? If you don't see, they're saying you're not a soldier, you are a settler. But they're so if you recall a stream that Nick and I did, I mean, he said he has said this before. He said there is, and also Scott Ritter, there are no innocent civilians in the West Bank or even in Israel. And to Nick's point that he made, and I think it was the same stream or maybe a subsequent stream, he made this point that it is required when you hit 18 that you go into the IDF. I had a story, and I'll get to that story, that you go into the IDF, but then you go out and now you're a settler. But, and they're going to get to this report, Israel, a lot of times, the state of Israel occupy those former IDF officers who are now quote unquote civilians, but so they're acting in the same soldier capacity without officially being soldiers. That's essentially what's happening in the West Bank. So they're saying, oh, we don't control the West Bank. No, it's not, because you have settlers there who are trained by the IDF doing the same job. And that's what this man is saying here, who lives in the West Bank. He's saying, you're not a fucking soldier, bro.
CNN obtained this video from inside Hebron, a divided city, filmed a few days after the Hamas October 7 attack. The Palestinian man won't comply. He says he recognizes the man with the gun as a settler, not a soldier. In this tense climate, if a soldier issues an order, you comply. But is everyone with a gun and fatigues a soldier? The West Bank is under Israeli military occupation. It's also believed to be home to almost 750,000 settlers, Israeli civilians living in the occupied territories. Settlers consider this part of their biblical homeland and are expanding into Palestinian territories, even though the UN Security Council considers their presence illegal. Yet settlers are integral to Israel's security plan in the occupied territories. As Israel defense
settlers are integral, they said it with an accent, but integral to the Israeli state in West Bank. Why is that if they're civilians? How can that be if they're civilians? That's because they're not.
Defense Force reservists and settlement security squads. Responding, the IDF says, to security threats in settlements, towns, and villages. Palestinians told CNN they consider armed settlers a greater threat than ever before. Their remit from the IDF is blurring the lines as settlers encroach on Palestinian land. Like here, in the Palestinian village of Tuwani, where there's a settlement at the top of the hill. In this video, you see men in military fatigues. The IDF equips both civilian settler security squads and soldiers in the region. As you can
hear that? The IDF equips them. Those are settlers. These are not soldiers here. Where they get these fatigues and these arms from? The IDF.
As you can see here, it's almost impossible to differentiate. They point their rifles at residents and then...
Let me rewind so she can make the point as a linear point instead of an interruption.
As you can see here, it's almost impossible to differentiate.
Like always, I didn't rewind far enough, so let me go back far enough. Here, this is where I'm going.
From the IDF is blurring the lines as settlers encroach on Palestinian land. Like here, in the Palestinian village of Tuwani, where there's a settlement at the top of the hill. In this video, you see men in military fatigues. The IDF equips both civilian settler security squads and soldiers in the region. As you can see here, it's almost impossible to differentiate. They point their rifles at residents and then they shoot, according to eyewitnesses. CNN shared the images we gathered in the West Bank with a senior IDF official who was unable to tell us who here is in the IDF and who is not. We asked how then are Palestinians expected to differentiate? The official told CNN there have been cases of reservists who did not act in accordance with Army standards, adding there is no place in the IDF for such behavior. Every case that breaches Army standards will be investigated. Palestinians, the official said, should contact their local brigade. But Palestinian rights activist and local resident Basil Adra says settlers in military fatigues are forcing Palestinians off their land.
These settlers and with their guns, and they're pointing it to the head of the residents, and they tell them, if you don't leave in 24 hours, we will shot you. So the family would understand that they're not playing. It's a serious threat of killing if you don't leave your home. That led for like 35 families to leave. And these settlers have been wearing uniform also.
Settlers have heavyweight support in Israel's far-right government. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister for National Security, settler. After the Hamas October 7 attack, Ben-Gvir loosened gun permit regulations, making it easier for tens of thousands of Israeli civilians to bear arms.
So these are the innocent people that they're talking about. These settlers, are they innocent to you? Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to be able to play a little more of this. I got to get on to the next item, and maybe I'll cover it again but there's another piece to this segment I want to add because of that last person, the support they're getting from that guy, the elected official. Let me go to Real Nico. Where is it? There he goes. Real Nico House Nico House. I'm saying his full Twitter name. His name is Nico. But here's another tidbit of a receipt about this particular guy. His name is Ben Jarvi. I always say his name wrong. I'll just give you his title. Israeli National Security Minister says he wants to kill one Palestinian prisoner every day. All of the Israeli hostages are not returned home. If he cares that much, why didn't he pressure Netanyahu to take the deal to return? So this is that person, the person who supports the settlers in the West Bank, the one who loosened the gun laws so more settlers could carry guns to terrorize the Palestinians and move them off kick them out of their homes. This is that guy. Let's listen to what Nico House says.
Israeli National Security Minister Ben-Gvir is calling for the execution of one Palestinian prisoner associated with Hamas per day.
I'm going to put this full screen so you can see the whole thing.
Are not returned to Israel.
I don't even know where to start with how fucked up this is. But we're going to try.
First of all, this isn't even like a new sentiment for Ben. This man was trying to execute Palestinian prisoners last month. Like, this isn't even like a Christmas wish for this man or a Hanukkah wish. He's just a sociopath 24/7. Not to mention, when he made this damn stupid statement, he didn't even think, what if I say something like this and Hamas is like, oh, really? That's fine. We'll just execute your prisoners if you want to play that game. Speaking of which, could you imagine if Hamas had said we were going to execute one Israeli prisoner a day until all of the Palestinians are freed from Israel? The world would go insane. Mainstream media would justify even further the genocide happening in Gaza, and Zionists would see that as a reason to decimate Gaza in a way worse than what they're already doing. But I hope you weren't one of the ones that made the mistake of thinking this is actually about him caring about Israeli prisoners, because there was a deal on the table to exchange 100% of Palestinian prisoners and 100% of Israeli prisoners, and they said no, which means this threat wouldn't even be necessary if you would have just exchanged the prisoners. But you're more concerned about killing Palestinians than you are about saving Israelis. And of course, he's trying to justify murdering Palestinians in prison by associating them with Hamas. But you all should remember that 233 out of the 300 prisoners that were released weren't even formally charged and were held as administrative detainees. In other words, they were just going to kill a bunch of people. It didn't matter if they were Hamas. They want to tell you they were Hamas so that they don't look like the murderous, animalistic psychopaths that they actually are. Like, did they really believe that we were going to believe that they actually were going to kill people that were associated with Hamas? Bruh, y'all call kids Hamas before you kill them. Y'all literally call nuns Hamas before you kill them. Y'all call pastors and journalists and women and Christian and Muslim and like literally anyone you want to kill indiscriminately, you just call them Hamas. Bro, you just want to kill Palestinians. So just say that instead of pretending like you actually give a fuck about Israeli prisoners.
Spot on. That's Nico House. Shout out to Nico House. Hasn't been on. We got to bring him on soon.
Israeli National Security Minister.
So I think actually 1 second here. We may cover the second half of this story once she goes live on TV, whenever she does this full report, because this is just a snippet of the full report. I'm sure at some point we will probably cover that, but let's move to the next part. And that is Fetterman is a plant, and or I should say corporate plant. We're gonna visit this video here. I know I'm moving along between the topics, but I'm trying to squeeze in everything at this time. But let's pause 1 second to do a quick like check. Let's make sure we hit that like button to get us to our target. And I'm gonna check and see what our target is. I got about another hour or so, hour 90 minutes to go. We are currently sitting at 246 likes. I don't even remember what our target was. Oh, our target is 300. So 246. Thank you for doing that. Can we get to 300 ASAP? And then we'll move on to the next target. Let's change this. And then we get back to our story. All right, let's get to this story. This is, where is the... Oh, I guess I don't have one. Let's do this. Fetterman is a corporate plant. And I'll explain what I mean here. And I think we can start the segment here. John Fetterman, in my opinion, is a corporate plant. I don't believe that a person who came in as a progressive and then less than a year, maybe 2 years later, you've made this just sort of 180, not even 180, maybe 160 turn from who you proclaim to be to get elected. I think, he played a role and he's still sort of playing a role. I'm that worker guy. I'm the hardworking Pennsylvania sort of person who was a progressive, and he got elected, and then he decided to take his costume or his disguise off. That's essentially, in my opinion, what's happening with John Fetterman. But let's listen. He talks about Israel. He talks about the divide within the Democratic Party over Israel and Palestine. So let's listen.
In our politics lead, it is a critical moment for President Biden and Democrats as the war in the Middle East is causing deep divisions, particularly among younger voters, and a fight is raging on Capitol Hill over immigration. Joining me now to discuss is Democratic Senator John Fetterman from the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's good to see you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with President Biden. We see in today's New York Times Siena College poll, if the presidential election were held today, Biden would likely lose to Donald Trump.
This is a New York Times Siena poll. We covered it a couple of times yesterday. I didn't get through the whole segment because that story of Trump broke about the Colorado removing off the ballot. But 44 to 46, and margin of error is 3.5. It's listed along the right side. That's why I have to turn my head. Margin of error is 3.5. Now, this is a poll for December 10th to the 14th, but there was another poll that just dropped today about swing states, and Donald Trump is up in 5 of the 6 swing states that's polled and outside of the margin error.
Why do you think that is? And do you think that the party should consider nominating someone else to be the Democratic Party's presidential nominee?
Now, the question is, why do you think President Biden is losing, and should they nominate somebody else? Let's listen to John Fetterman.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really mean much to me because the election is for nearly a year ago, and Joe Biden already beat Trump in Pennsylvania, and that's what I really talk about, how he's going to absolutely win in Pennsylvania. And you know, I understand that there's kind of a division between the younger voters between Israel and Gaza, and you know, I really believe the president is very much on the right side of that. And sometimes, you know, you may alienate some voters, but it's really most important to be on the right side on that. I mean, that's where I'm at.
I want to get to Israel in a second, but first, I know you're eager to talk about the proposed sale of U.S.
And I'm not eager to listen to that. That's a local issue he's talking about, the sale to a Chinese company of a local steel company. That's what he's talking about here. I'm not interested in that. So let's go. That's like China propaganda, basically, because he's against it, not because of the sale. He's against it because of who it's being sold to.
Let's go back to talking about Israel and the divisions in the Democratic Party, particularly among young voters when it comes to Israel's war against Hamas. 72% of young voters, according to this new poll, disapprove of how President Biden is handling the Israel-Hamas war.
72%, and this is ages 18 to 29. It's a 3.5% margin of error. So at the best case scenario, you're talking 68% disapprove, and a worst case scenario, you're talking about 76% disapprove. So between 68 and 70% of young people between the ages of 18 and 29 disapprove of this
war. You've been very vocal in your full support for Israel. I see the Israeli flag behind you in your office there. You've been very clearly arguing that Hamas bears responsibility for the tragedy of what's going on in Gaza. Why do you think so many younger people, especially in your party, see it differently?
I really don't know. I do know that a lot of people are getting their perspective from TikTok. And I think if you're kind of getting your perspective on the world on TikTok, it's going to tend to be kind of warped or not reflective of the history and actually the way things absolutely are. And
this is something that only plays well for 60 plus year olds, 55 plus. They get their education on TikTok. So do you know you can take videos of documentaries, for example, or lectures, and do you know you can put those on TikTok? So TikTok is a medium, just like, you know, watching your TV. They're pretending like the fact that you're getting your information on TikTok somehow means the information is incorrect. And I'm saying that is, I mean, we are all on, or for those of us who are on TikTok, we know that that's preposterous. Let's let him continue to make his terrible points here.
And what is very clear is that Hamas started this, and they actually broke the ceasefire, and they attacked and murdered babies.
Hamas broke the ceasefire. We're just not going to count that 2022 was the deadliest year for the people in Gaza in a long time. We're not going to count that. That's part of the ceasefire. All the murdering, the slaughtering of Palestinians over a year. That's part of the ceasefire to them.
Babies, children, women, attacked a music concert and everything. It's outrageous. And from
the narrative that, anyway, I'm not going to say that.
From now on, it's been very clear that Israel would very much want there to be peace, but they've made it very clear that after
Israel very much well wanted to be peace. Do I need to rewind and bring up the video we just saw of the Israeli settlers trying to kick people out of their homes in the West Bank? So we like, no one is confused about this. Even the people who are pro-Israel, do you think they don't know what the fuck is going on really over there? I don't buy anybody that thinks that Israel is not indiscriminately killing people. I don't buy when people act like Israel is not committing war crimes. I don't buy it when people pretend like Israel is not committing a genocide, like when John Kirby and all these state officials want to act like they don't see the evidence yet. But when Putin kidnaps people, that's a war crime. But when they kill twice as many people that Putin kidnapped, and you can make that determination in a question, you got to go, oh, I can't be the judge and jury right now. Let's listen to the rest of John Fetterman. This guy, and the reason I call him a corporate plant, one, he took corporate money. Two, he said he was down with Israel. He was going to lean into Israel right at the cusp, right before he got elected. And three, it feels like he's playing a role. Like this whole outfit he has on is part of a character, in the same way that, you know how Zelensky still comes to Washington, D.C. The motherfucker couldn't find a suit. Nowhere from Ukraine all the way to Washington, D.C. ain't a suit to be found. He's in a costume because he's playing a role in the same way that this person is playing a role. And this is why I call him a corporate plant.
October 7th. That's just not possible so long as Hamas is allowed to exist.
On immigration, which is a big issue going on in the Senate right now, you recently said, quote, I hope Democrats can understand that it isn't xenophobic to be concerned about the border, unquote. And even though you did run for lieutenant governor and senator.
So is it surprising that the guy who pulled a gun on a black jogger is now going hardcore on immigration? Is that surprising to anyone? You don't think pulling a gun on a black jogger was indicative of how he was going to position himself on immigration? That has no connection to you? Let's continue.
As a progressive, you're now rejecting that label. What would you call yourself?
I would just call myself a Democrat, and I believe that I'm on the right side of issues, whether that's being very pro-choice, maybe that I believe that is being pro-union, and if I believe that's for pro-Israel on that as well, too. There's absolutely different kinds of opinions in the Democratic Party. And I've always been very clear that I'm going to stand on the right side of what I believe it is. And I've been very upfront on others as well, too. And I really have been able to find anybody that can say there's not any kind of an issue right now on the border that has around 270,000 people being encountered on the border just in 1 month. And
well, nobody's saying there's not an issue at the border. No one's saying that. What we're saying is the issue that's being identified are two different things. The issue at the border is not to get rid of people. The issue at the border is that we need more judges so they can adjudicate these asylum cases. Like 10 times the amount of judges. The reason that people are these immigrants that they complain about are staying in the country is because they're waiting to be heard by a judge. And it takes like 4 to 5 years to be heard by a judge. That's what needs to be the solution, John Fetterman, not your right-wing sort of framing of this. And he's gonna talk about it more. Let's listen.
And to put that in perspective, as I've said before, that's the side of Pittsburgh. And if roughly the size of Pittsburgh is showing up in the border, if that's what you need to say, that's fine. That's not really an issue. As a progressive, then I guess that's why.
That's not what anybody is saying. One, they're showing up at the border because of U.S. imperialist policies all over the globe. If you're fucking their home and their house up in their country, not allowing them to economically grow, then they're gonna go find the place where at least the propaganda is saying that's the land of opportunity. You fucking torch your neighbor's house, and then you wondering why the motherfuckers at your door with their fucking clothes and shit.
That's why I wouldn't be a progressive, but I have remained and will always be very, very pro-immigration, perhaps as much as anybody in there.
Before you go, sir, it's been nice talking to you. How is your health? Obviously.
Nobody gives a fuck about this motherfucker's health. Fuck that motherfucker. Fuck him. Talking about some how's your fuck the bitch. He's this fucking despicable piece of shit. All right, so let's play this video. I'm not even gonna preface it.
I'm John Fetterman, and I'm a Democrat, and I'm a progressive.
What?
I'm a proud.
This guy is playing a role.
Proud progressive. I'm John Fetterman.
I gotta say, it doesn't look like I didn't see this video at the time. I mean, I don't live in Pennsylvania. If I saw this video and when he's claiming to be a progressive, I'd be like, this looks very unconvincing to me. It sounds like you are just you're progressive in the same way that Hillary Clinton says she's a progressive, and Nancy Pelosi says she's a progressive, and Hakeem Jeffries says they're a progressive. They're progressive by the definition. They're progressive if the definition of progressive means I'm just calling myself progressive as a branding sort of exercise.
I'm John Fetterman, and I'm a Democrat, and I'm a progressive. I'm a proud progressive. I'm John Fetterman.
Let's move on. This guy is fucking terrible. And by the way, community notes. Let's click on it. So somebody posted this. I'm John Fetterman. I'm a Democrat. I'm a progressive. Look.
And I'm a Democrat.
And they quote tweeted him. They quote tweeted John Fetterman where he says, "I'm not a progressive. I'm just a regular Democrat." Remember he posted that? Community note said Senator Fetterman did campaign as a progressive Democrat, and I'm not quite sure he has addressed why he has made the switch. He's more framing it as he's never been a progressive, not that he's changing. He's trying to frame it that way. Now we're gonna get to another story here. This is just terrible story we're gonna get to, and that is snipers. Let me actually put this up. Let me get this set up the right way before I start speaking on the story. But let's pivot the story, and let me take this comment off here. What am I doing again? Israeli snipers. That's the story. All right, so let's get into it here. Israeli snipers target a Christian church and murder an old lady and daughter. Excuse me. Now let me read the caption. This is Democracy Now! They cover this. I want to use their video as a foundation just to get all sort of the facts about what happened out first before we get into some reaction and some analysis. So let's first find out what exactly happened. Oops, let me read it actually. It says, Palestinian Christians in Gaza are being shot by Israeli snipers while sheltering at churches. We speak to Philip Farah, a relative of the 84-year-old Ilham Farah, a beloved music teacher and one of the civilians shot and killed by Israel outside of Gaza's only Catholic church. So let's listen to this.
Ilham Farah, who is a beloved 84-year-old music teacher, daughter of a famed Palestinian poet, was killed by an Israeli sniper outside the Holy Family Church, where the mother and daughter were killed on Sunday by an Israeli sniper. Philip Farah, can you describe what is happening there right now and talk about this small Palestinian Christian community under siege? How is this happening?
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Democracy Now! Yes, 3 of my grandparents are from Gaza. I was raised in Jerusalem, but we had very strong connections to Gaza. There were many Palestinian Christian families in Gaza. It was a thriving community. Our relatives, the Medbeks, the Tarazis, the Sabas, the Jahshan, Farah, including Farah, and Slayers, were a thriving community that lived in peace with their Muslim neighbors, and even there were Jewish neighbors. Back then, one of my grand uncles was a grains merchant, and some of his best friends were Jewish grains merchants as well. They were in the business of exporting barley, actually, to the United Kingdom for upgrading beer in breweries in the UK. Over the years, that community has dwindled to a tiny minority because of the horrible conditions that Israel has imposed on Gaza. Especially back in 2013, the number was 3,000, far smaller than it was, say, at the turn of the century. Now it's only barely 1,000 people, and they're all sheltering in St. Porphyrius, the Orthodox Church. That is the church where my father, uncles, and aunts, and members of my extended family were baptized. So many were sheltering in St. Porphyrius. I think still some are. 4 of my Tarazi relatives were killed there. Ilham actually was sheltering at St. Porphyrius until the Israeli bombing that killed 18 Christians in that church. And then she moved to the Holy Cross, the Holy Family Church. She was a delightful 84-year-old woman, beloved of many students in Gaza, but she was strong-headed. And against the advice of her fellows who were sheltering there, she wanted to go home. She just simply wanted to go home. And she proceeded to do that. A sniper shot her in the leg. And folks who were trying to rescue her were all being shot at, so she bled to death. What could a woman like that, 84-year-old woman, have done to hurt Israelis? So, this is a continuing saga.
Yeah, so we got the basics out of that video. It's just a very, very disturbing. And here's a photo of her and her daughter, and I'll read the caption. This is low key. The Israeli military is claiming that these two Palestinian. Actually, let me come back to that, because something else I need to cover before I come to that. Something else I need to cover before I come to that. Yeah, this one. Because I need to go in a certain progression. That's more of a last video because there's some update in the information. So let's play this one first. And this is Sky News, and it says reports have said that 2 women were killed after allegedly being shot by the Israeli sniper inside a Catholic church. Archbishop of Westminster described it as a bold, bloody killing. So this is an archbishop who's describing it here. Uh-oh. Let me refresh the video. It does that sometimes on Twitter. And it should play. Hopefully it'll play. Oh, there it goes. Let's play.
What happened there over the weekend?
Well, as far as I know, and the information comes from, I think, a very reliable source, the cardinal in Jerusalem, who's the patriarch for that parish. And he said...
so the cardinal in Jerusalem is the one he's getting his information from.
The compound around the Church of the Holy Family was attacked. Some of its crucial infrastructure was targeted with rockets.
So the churches, they're not just shooting them, they're targeting churches and destroying their infrastructure, as he's stating here.
And I think most distressing of all, an elderly lady who was leaving the church to go to the toilet was shot dead. And then her daughter, who went out to try and assist her, was killed as well. All of this.
These two, and she looks just like her mom right there. These are the two that were killed. These are the two. These is Hamas to you? But we're going to get to that, where now they're trying to act like these are Hamas. These people are disgusting.
This within what has been clearly designated as a church place, which I cannot believe for 1 minute has rocket launchers in it. And it's a community that since October has sheltered hundreds of people and looked after them. And the religious sisters, the nuns, that have been cooking and feeding people. And the house where they live in that compound, where they look after 54 very handicapped people. The water tanks were blown off, the solar.
They're looking after handicapped people? The water tanks were blown up. These ladies are looking after handicapped. I mean, some of these churches are looking after handicapped people, and Israel is just.
Panels were blown off, and the house was rendered almost uninhabitable. So it's a desperate situation for them.
The Pope's called it terrorism. How would you describe it?
Well, it's certainly a cold-blooded killing. That's the description that is given. And what absolutely puzzles me is this does nothing to further Israel's right to defend itself, which I understand. I mean, the last time I was there, and that's a few years ago, it was made very clear to me that Gaza, and this community particularly, lived under the domination of Hamas. You know, so they would have maybe 6 hours electricity a day, and then the rest of it would be switched to the underground network. And that's 4 or 5 years ago, and it won't have weakened. But the killing of evidently vulnerable and innocent people seems to me to set back what Israel says it's trying to achieve.
What explanation could
What they say they're trying to achieve, because it's obviously a lie. It's obviously made up.
there be?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know about the management of soldiers in uniform and the discipline that they should be exercising. But we've seen in a number of ways that discipline has broken down. And these would appear to be just random shootings. So I hope those responsible for it, because this is a structured army, will be held to account for what they've done.
Yeah. They'll be held account. Oh, okay. If accountable means they go on vacation, yeah, they'll be held to account. She alluded to the Pope calling this out. Let's play the Pope, because he does speak to this. Because understand, this is a Catholic church. This is why the Roman Empire is getting involved, and that's what the Catholic Church. The Roman Empire never went away. They became the Catholic Church.
Continuo a ricevere da casa notizie molto.
I'm going to read. So let me turn the sound down, I guess, and then I'll read. Actually, I'll turn it not off, but down. Okay. I continue to receive from Gaza very serious and painful news. Unarmed civilians are the target of bombings and gunfire. This has even happened within the compounds of the Holy Family Parish, where there are no terrorists, only families, children, people who are sick and have disabilities, and nuns. A mother and a daughter, Nihada Kala Atan and Samar Aton, were killed, and others were injured by snipers as they walked to the bathroom. The house of the sisters and mother of Teresa was damaged, and their generator was hit. So some say this is terrorism This is war. Yes, it is war. It is terrorism. That is why Scripture affirms that God stops war, breaks the bow, let us pray to the Lord for peace. And that is the Pope chiming in on that. And let's go to the next thing. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to everything. So here, let's go to this Norman Finkenstein tweet here. And he says, assassins. The media reported today in shock that Israeli snipers killed 2 Christian women inside a church in Gaza. But is that news? Israeli snipers routinely kill unarmed civilians. Here's a sample of unarmed Palestinian civilians killed by specially trained Israeli snipers during the overwhelmingly nonviolent Great March of Return in 2018. And I'm just going to show you a couple of receipts here that he posted. This is Norman Finkenstein who posted this. Here's one. Mohammed, 24-year-old football player for some sports team, took out his telephone and began recording a selfie video. An Israeli security force sniper shot him in the right side of his right leg, and as he filmed himself approximately 150 meters from the separation fence. The bullet passed through his right leg and hit his left leg just above the knee, shattering the base of his femur. And here's another one. Yosef Krones was 19, student journalist when he attended the demonstration. He wore a blue press vest and carried his photography equipment, including a camera and a tripod. He sat cross-legged on top of a sand dune to take photographs of the demonstration at least 800 meters from the separation fence. After approximately 40 minutes, as he stood up, the ISF shot him with 2 bullets in immediate succession, which hit him in the right knee and the left knee. And Norman Finkenstein gives this is at least 15 examples of how this is quite normal. So this is not like, oh, this is out of the realm of what normality for the Israel government, and it's not. Let's get to this one here. Now, no preface needed. Let's just listen.
You heard our member of parliament, Leila Moran there, her relatives, 6 of them, targeted by Israeli army snipers in a church compound in Gaza. What on earth is going on?
Let me rewind because it was low. It's only a few seconds, but let's still rewind.
You heard our member of parliament, Leila Moran there, her relatives, 6 of them, targeted by Israeli army snipers in a church compound in Gaza. What on earth is going on?
Well, that's the question to Leila, not to me. I think that I can only say that we as the Jewish people are used to blood libels. So to hear that Israeli snipers are targeting women on purpose and not letting them leave the church is something that reminds me usually the atmosphere in the Middle Ages before another holiday.
Are you saying it's a lie? Are you saying it didn't happen?
This is a flat lie, absolutely. No Israeli sniper ever purposely targeted any civilian, to say nothing about women.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the Pope doesn't think it's a lie. You think it's a lie. What about the targeting of the maternity hospital in Khan Yunis? Is that a lie as well?
Hospitals, as well as schools and other compounds and safe zones created for civilian population in Gaza, unfortunately, are being cynically used by Hamas. I don't think that I'm bringing any breaking news to you if I would say that Hamas gave a new meaning to the expression human shield. Unfortunately, yes, and I do have to say that we regret them. There are some civilian casualties in Gaza. Hamas are the only ones to blame here because, as I've said, they just don't care, or even I would say more than that. They are probably happy because then the reaction of the world comes And this is the only way for them to survive.
But the
as a terror
person,
organization.
right? But the people firing the tank shells are not against hospitals, are not Hamas. It's the IDF. I mean, this reminds people of the scenes in Mariupol at the beginning of the Ukraine war. There were also maternity hospitals targeted by the Russians. Is that the kind of company you want to keep?
With all the due respect, I think that comparing between what is happening right now in the Gaza Strip and what happened in Mariupol, I'm telling you, as someone who was actually born in the Ukraine, is just...
You were born in the Ukraine. You're born in the Ukraine. What the fuck you doing in Israel? This is clown shit here. This Zionism shit is some clown ass shit, man. But I gotta move on because I'm gonna be getting out of here. I need to stick to my schedule. Now let's go to the low-key video. I'm sorry, low-key tweet. It says the Israeli military is claiming that these two Palestinian Christian women killed by Israeli snipers in the Holy Family Church in Gaza were actually working for Hamas. I hope British journalists treat these lies with the disdain they deserve. But yes, they work for Hamas now, guys. Everybody. These two women, mother and daughter, work for Hamas at a Catholic church where there was a lot of disability, people with disabilities that they were taking care for. Where apparently those with disabilities were the Hamas too? This is cartoonish sort of level propaganda, and it shows you that they don't care. Like this level of propaganda, how elementary it is, it shows you they don't even care to even give a believable story. That's how much they don't care about your life, which is astonishing to me. All right, let's move on to the next story, and that is Marianne Williamson goes on the Humanist report to talk about Israel and the Palestinian, if you want to call it the conflict for this segment. Now, I watched it, and what was hilarious to me, and I tweeted it out and I screenshot it when I was watching it, because when it starts out in the video, and I'm going to get to the video in just a second, when it starts out in the video, they're talking about politics, they're talking about, the state of the race and all that kind of thing. And then when they pivot to when Mike says, hey, let's talk about Israel, Marianne Williamson picks up her drink, and I'm going to call it wine because it's funny. She picks up her wine and downs that shit. Like, and I took the snapshot, and I thought that shit was hilarious because she knows this is a person who understands that her position is terrible. And let me read what I said. I said, Marianne Williamson knows her take on Palestine and Israel is so bad that when Humanist report says, quote, let's talk about Israel now, end quote, Marianne Williamson takes a huge drink. And then let me show you this other one before I move on. Where is it? Oh, I thought I saved it, but I'll just click this here. And we'll get to the video, the actual video. I quote tweeted my own tweet, and let me show you what that said, because she takes another sip. Actually, it's not going to go. Anyway, she takes another sip after the exchange. She takes another sip. You'll see it in the video. And let's get to the video now.
Running in the 2024 Democratic Party primary against Joe Biden, and she is here to talk about her campaign. Full disclosure, though, I do intend on voting for Marianne in the upcoming 2024 Oregon primary, so my biases. I'm laying it.
That's crazy because he said some not so good stuff about Marianne Williamson when she first started to run, and we covered it as a video that we made about it.
All out there. That doesn't necessarily mean that I won't ask hard questions, but I think it's important for viewers that they know who the interviewer is, where they're coming from, because you never see that on mainstream media. But
so, like I said, I want to move to the Israel stuff because I don't need to hear this fluff stuff.
Goes both ways,
Okay. Okay, so I do want to move on. I want to talk about healthcare. So healthcare, if you go to your website,
oops, wait a minute here. Why do my notes say something different? This is starting to. So what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to YouTube and get this video because it looks like Twitter may be acting up with the playback of the video. So let's go to YouTube and get the YouTube version of this, which is ridiculous because I cut the video and put it on Twitter so I didn't have to do this. But because it's not playing correctly, I will have to go to YouTube anyway. And here it goes. Did I click it? Oh, sorry. My bad. I didn't click it. So we're going to go. So this is
I don't think it would be the United States suggesting it. That's
it gets pretty bad, by the way. I should have said that. It gets really bad. Really bad. Because he goes and asks her if she would recommend Henry Kissinger to the ICC if she was elected president, and she says no. Henry Kissinger. It doesn't go well for her. But here's the Israel part.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like
why she takes
I like that you also talked about like there's a lid kind of keeping the will of the people kind of suppressed. And we're seeing this right now in action with regard to the ceasefire, for example. I mean, multiple polls have shown majority support for Americans, especially among Democrats. And that's not something that is even a possibility, at least according to the Biden administration's rhetoric. I wanted to ask you about that, by the way. So when it comes to Israel-Palestine, Biden is fundamentally at odds with his base. So I'm curious how you would differ on this policy and where your biggest disagreements with the Biden administration is.
Well, I've been calling for a ceasefire from the very beginning. The day of October 7th, I appreciated the president's moral clarity. The next day, however, he said, I'm going to be meeting with Jewish American.
So let's break down what she's saying, because she says a lot of things and she purposely under-describes it so that it's not clear what she's saying. When she says, I was happy for the president's moral clarity on October 7th, that means she's fine with the president siding with Israel and the IDF for this nonsense. That's what this means. She couldn't say that because she's trying to get lefties, and they're the ones that's out protesting. So she's very, you know what, I'm not going to even describe it.
Among Democrats, and that's not something that is even a possibility, at least according to the Biden administration's rhetoric. I wanted to ask you about that, by the way. So when it comes to Israel-Palestine, Biden is fundamentally at odds with his base. So I'm curious how you would differ on this policy and where your biggest disagreements with the Biden administration is.
Well, I've been calling for a ceasefire from the very beginning. The day of October 7th, I appreciated the president's moral clarity. The next day, however, he said, I'm going to be meeting with Jewish American leaders today. I would have said, had I been president, I'm going to be meeting with both Jewish and Arab American leaders today.
So she would have called for a ceasefire in the beginning. Instead of meeting with just Jewish leaders, she would have met with Jewish and Palestinian leaders. So these are differences.
Particularly Palestinian American leaders. America's highest ally should be humanity itself. So ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, there's no, this is wrong-minded on every level.
Understand, in the professional managerial class world, in the NATO left world, in the boutique left world, a ceasefire is the highest honor that you can give as a person in solidarity with Palestinians. You saying ceasefire is the pinnacle, is the number one slot. Now, if you're more radical like us, of course, that's not the number one slot. Ceasefire is literally like not even opening a door. It's like putting your key in the door. You're not even in there. That's the beginning. You're not even haven't done anything yet. But to them, that is the top thing.
Every level, this military action of theirs. Immediate ceasefire, release of the hostages, and immediate architecture for a two-state solution. To me, that is absolutely the only way.
Would you be open to the idea of a one-state solution with equal rights? And I ask this because more and more, there's been a lot of individuals, including Israeli scholars like Avi Shlein, for example, who don't think that a two-state solution is any longer possible just because there's so many settlements. Like, for example, in the West Bank, I think the number is 750,000 Israeli settlements. So how do you do two-state given this situation currently? Is one state something that would be on the table for you or that you would consider? Or do you think that two-state really is the only path forward?
Well, I realize it's something that would have to be resurrected, but those settlements have never been legal. They've never been legal. Those people shouldn't be there. So to say, oh, there's 750,000, where do you put them? Back to where they were. I'm sorry. I'm a practical.
Where do you put them? Where were they? What do you mean back to where they were? Where is back, Marianne Williamson? Back to Ukraine? Like in the previous segment where the guy said he's born in Ukraine, back to Russia?
Woman, when you talk about one state, if ever there was a prospect for a bloody civil war, it's one state. It's like La La Land. Who's going to govern?
So I have to insert this because we also believe in a one state, but not from the perspective of the professional managerial class NATO left. They view one state as Israel's state. It should be one state. Palestinian, if Israelis want to live there, I'm sorry, if people who call themselves Israelis want to live there, that's fine. But that's Palestine. It should be a one state, and it should be Palestine, not Israel.
Govern this one state. I mean, you think it's bad now, them not even living right there together. So I believe that it's going to be
I can't even look at this one.
Quite a long time.
It's terrible.
Before a one state is desirable there.
Yeah.
You know, I heard somebody.
Do you get the feelings that she has any idea that she knows what she's talking about? Think about that as she talks.
I thought this was so American. Somebody said there needs to be just a one state, and it needs to be secular. And I thought if ever there was an American blind spot, here are two people who are very clear that their religions matter. And here's this American progressive coming in saying, and it'll be a secular country.
Just that comment, I should just shut this fucking segment down right there. I don't understand how you can be this bad. She's saying that it should be a two-state religious country instead of a one-state not secular country. And she's making it seem like, oh, here's this progressives trying to say this needs to be secular. Yes, it does. There should be no religious state anywhere, in my opinion. But she's attempting to sort of frame it as it's some sort of like we don't know what we're talking about. Like let me let her finish. Because I don't want to use too much.
So we're going to impose that. So
I'm trying not to use so much profanity with this person. This person is one of the people that really gets under my skin because, again, I trained salespeople for years. This is clearly a salesperson and a bad one. Vivek will be on the other spectrum. He's a top salesman in a sales class. He will be the top. She will be the worst one who thinks she's doing a good job.
So I to me, they both deserve and
She doesn't
need
have any idea what she's
sovereign
talking about.
states, both of them. Easy, no, but one state that doesn't in any way to me solve a problem.
Well, here's what I will say to that. So a lot of folks were also fearful of, internal disputes with the end of apartheid in South Africa. And on top of that, the other argument, the counter argument is, prior to the Balfour Declaration, there was peace. Arabs and Jewish people, for the most part, lived in that area. and
But
the
there were
Jewish
no states
population
at
was
all.
much smaller, but there was relative peace. So this is kind of the thinking of individuals like Avi Shlaim, and how it is even though it's inconceivable now, it is something that could be possible. What would you say to that?
I would say that the days that you're talking about, there were tribes wandering around. There were no nation states. There
Good
wasn't
Lord.
a nation state.
Good Lord.
There
Who
weren't
told
any
you
states
this?
at all. But that's very different than one state. And in today's world, there's going to be a state. So it's not like we can go back to that. And I don't believe that the entire state of Israel is apartheid. There are apartheid laws. I believe that there is clearly the West Bank is, clearly the settlements are, but there are Arabs in the Knesset. I'm not.
She clearly doesn't even understand what the word apartheid means, because she's saying the way that it's not apartheid because there's Palestinians in a particular government. So Marianne Williamson now proclaims that Israel is not an apartheid state. Meanwhile, we had the Palestinian Community Network on here, and they corrected us. They said, no, stop saying apartheid state. That's too nice. Genocidal state before October 7th. We're talking about our last summit when we had them on. That was earlier this year in the summertime. They were saying that this is a genocidal state, and they're only proving that today. But even after all what she's seen happen, 15,000 plus people at the time of this recording killed, Israel is not an apartheid state. Who's still voting for this person? Hold on a second here. I gotta see. It went away. I only sneeze about maybe 5 times in a year. So when I sneeze, it's kind of like, wow, hold on, what the hell's going on? But anyway, let it play a little more, and I'll move on to the next thing.
I'm not enrolled in the idea that this is not South Africa to me.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Right. You know what that means? Interesting. This is a bad take, and I'm just going to move on. I don't want this to be Nina Turner 2.0, where I bring on a candidate and she destroys her candidacy on her own on my channel. Israel is not an apartheid state. This is not South Africa. Meanwhile, 20 dead bodies and infrastructures destroyed, churches shot up, hospitals bombed. And I just showed you the other segment with Christian Amanpour when she's doing a report on the rise in violence in West Bank by the settlers. This is all bad by Marianne Williamson. But what I don't understand about Marianne Williamson is that there's been so many interviews that you have been caught off guard and illustrates that you have no idea about the subject matter, yet you still go on these shows without studying and brushing up on anything. You still seem very uninformed about this issue.
Let me ask you this, because you do support a ceasefire, which I think is the bare minimum. So that is, to me, you passed that test. Let's take it further, though. I'm curious. For what it's worth, you passed the test. So here's what I want to ask you.
And
in the event,
I think that's worth noting.
Right, true, very true. So in the event you become president, hypothetically speaking, I would assume that you would sign on to the International Criminal Court. So after...
Well, Dick Cheney might not be too happy about that. Or
she has no idea yet what the question's going to be. This is why she can say this. But then he's going to call her on her bluff. So what she's saying here, she wants to give the appearance, yeah, I'll join the IDC. And Dick Cheney better watch out for that, right? Because of what, Marianne? Are you trying to allude that you would do something to Dick Cheney or refer Dick Cheney to the ICC? Is that what you're trying to allude because you know your audience is left? But Mike from the Humanist Report is actually going to call her on this. Let's see how she backs off this now.
Or George Bush.
You know exactly what I was going to ask you. So yeah, with us under their jurisdiction, Would you?
No, she doesn't. Because she thought you was going to say Dick Cheney. He doesn't ask her about Dick Cheney. Listen to this.
President, not pull an Obama and actually recommend some of your predecessors for prosecution, including Joe Biden?
No. I would not.
Why not?
Did you see the tail? The clearing of the throat, and that's buying time so she can come up with an answer. She has no clue to that answer prior to it being asked. What to give, how it's going to be received. This has happened so many times with her in interviews that she goes on and she in the interview she's learning a policy position. And here's another one.
Because I believe that a lot of forgiveness and a lot of mercy is necessary going forward.
Oh my God, I'm about to vomit. Now, understand, listen to the pauses. Listen to how long the pauses are, because she's trying to come up on the fly with an acceptable answer that she has no idea about. So she throws in this lovey-dovey bullshit as an explanation. So let's listen again.
True, very true. So in the event you become president, hypothetically speaking, I would assume that you would sign on to the International Criminal Court. So after...
Yeah, Dick Cheney might not be too happy about that, or George Bush.
You know exactly what I was going to ask you. So yeah, with us under their jurisdiction, would you as president not pull an Obama and actually recommend some of your predecessors for prosecution, including Joe Biden?
No. I would not.
Why not?
Why? Listen to the pause.
Because I believe that a lot of forgiveness and a lot of mercy is necessary going forward. And if, I would certainly not, look at someone like, I'm not coming from a Gerald Ford place where he pardoned Richard Nixon, because I think it really hurt the nation that he pardoned.
What the fuck are you even talking about right now? She seemed to only know stuff that's pre-1970. That's the only stuff where she knows details of legislation. Anything after 1970, she has no details at all. So she's going back to Gerald Ford because she has no understanding how to apply what he's asking now. She can only apply to shit in the past.
Richard Nixon, especially when John Mitchell and Ehrlichman and all those guys, Haldeman, et cetera, had gone to jail. I think Haldeman went. But when I think of the things that I would like to achieve as president and the political capital that you have, having been elected president, I would not be immediately day one. There are a lot of things you could ask me about if I would do day one, or if I would do in the first 100 days, joining the criminal court and suggesting Joe Biden, Dick Cheney, and George Bush for criminal prosecution would be, to me, the most performative indulgence. To me, those things do.
Performative indulgence. So now she's going into nondescript adjectives and phrases that tell you nothing. That's what she's doing here. This person is flailing because she has no idea about the subject matter or what she's talking about.
Not represent the serious work of going forward and trying to right either our domestic or our foreign policy.
This is completely incoherent.
Where it is malfeasance.
But what do you say to this idea
that... Just like Jordan over at Status Quo at the time when he was interviewing her, he's understanding at the time your answer that in mid-interview, she has no idea. So let me baby step her and give her an easier hurdle to give the right answer, because that wasn't the right answer. So listen to what he does.
That if we never hold people who break international law accountable, that they're going to do it again. I mean, for example, let's say that Henry Kissinger was still alive. If you were president, would you even recommend somebody like him who's responsible for 4 or 5 million plus deaths?
To actually, first of all, I think other countries would suggest it. I don't think it would be the United States suggesting it. That's really how it works, I think. So,
but would you?
Would I?
She's trying so hard not to answer this question, because he's giving you one of the worst criminals, war criminals in history, as a layup. Okay. You can't do Joe Biden. Okay, I got you. You're not gonna do George. Okay, I got you. What about this historical figure who's dead, who has killed 4 or 5 million people? This person has no idea what she's talking about. And if you're voting for her, this is throwing away your vote. Because you're giving your vote to a person who has no idea what she's talking about and has no business running.
If you were president, would you even recommend somebody like him who's responsible for 4 or 5 million plus deaths?
To actually, first of all, I think other countries would suggest it.
It's the easy answer, yes or no. You see, she's trying to divert, but he doesn't allow that.
I don't think it would be the United States suggesting it. That's rarely how it works, I think. So,
but would you?
Huh? Would I?
Huh? Would you? Huh? I've never heard her say, huh. She's trying to buy time. She doesn't want to answer.
If I were president and we were in the criminal court, would I have suggested it?
Henry Kissinger, yeah.
I would not have suggested it, but if we were a member of the criminal court, then listen, one of the reasons we should be a member of the criminal court is because some of those things might not have happened if we had been. The fact that we were not a member of the criminal court is what made the Dick Cheneys of the world and the Henry Kissingers of the world feel such permission to carry out their imperialistic, militaristic tirades to begin with.
Listen to the description of what she acknowledges those two people did, but then in the same breath, she says she would not recommend them. Y'all need to start thanking RBN for having y'all dodge a bullet with this motherfucker right here. You realize how much money y'all would have thrown away on if we didn't spot this fucking charlatan from a long time ago? Clowns. She's a fucking clown. I'm gonna get she's one of the people that triggers me the most, along with Hillary Clinton and Obama. She's a fucking clown. So I did have one more segment that looks like I'm not gonna be able to fully get to, and that is based MSNBC, because I got two clips. One from Chris Hayes and the other from Ann Reid, both that are pretty based, and it's very surprising to hear both of them talk about. Maybe I'll cover it in full later, but I'll briefly play a little bit of what they both say here. Let's start with Chris Hayes, and this is based MSNBC, Joy Reid and Chris Hayes.
But that aside, the deeper problem here is that if you spend any time at all reading the Israeli press, listening to what Israeli leaders and commentators are actually saying, it is very clear that for a lot of people in government, the mass destruction of Gaza, raising it like Putin raised Grozny or Assad raised Aleppo, is the point, the goal. Many prominent members of the Israeli governing class don't think there is such a thing as an innocent civilian in Gaza, have said that everyone in Gaza deserves their fate. From Knesset member Merav Ben-Ari saying that, quote, the children of Gaza have brought this upon themselves, to an Israeli military spokesman saying the emphasis of Israel's military campaign was, quote, on damage and not on accuracy, to Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, suggesting there are no civilians in Gaza and everyone is a legitimate target, to journalist Shimon Riklin, who said this on Israeli TV.
חס וחלילה, איש המלחמה זה אני, אתה רגל על הגב. איש המלחמה זה אני מודה, אני אגיד את זה פה, לא אכפת לי שירדו עליי, אוספים פה חומרים. אני לא נרדם טוב בלי שאני רואה בתים קורסים בעזה. מה אני אעשה? עוד בתים, עוד מגדלים, שלא יהיה להם לאן לחזור.
So, for those that are listening, this is an Israeli official on some sort of show, and he's basically going ham. He says, I am for war crimes. And then he goes on and says, I do not care if I am criticized. I am unable to sleep if I don't see houses being destroyed in Gaza. This is what he's saying in this interview. I'll let it play on.
עוד מגדלים, שלא יהיה להם לאן לחזור.
That's not a fringe view in Israel. I mean, even the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, invoked the lessons from the biblical story of Amalek and addressed the nation in Hebrew in the end of October. And in that biblical chapter, God commands King Saul on how to respond to an attack by the rival kingdom of Amalek. Quote, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put them to death, men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Now, I will be the first to confess, I have no idea what to do about Hamas or about what comes next. But the Amalek method cannot be the solution. To be honest, I'm not particularly convinced the Israeli leadership has any idea what comes next. Many want full destruction. And Hamas also wants this war. They have been clear on that. I think they want it to continue. They seem to think all of this death and destruction benefits in the end because of the rage it will produce towards Israel. But whatever your views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it is just plainly the case that our country is supporting a war whose animating moral logic looks to most of the world, and frankly to me, to be that every single last person in Gaza is guilty and deserves their lot. And that is the moral logic of Hamas. It is the moral logic that drove the atrocity of October 7th. And an atrocity like October 7th cannot justify whatever comes after it, whatever the response. There is no terrorist attack, no matter how horrific, and truly October 7th was horrific, that can wash clean what we are seeing in Gaza and what we as Americans and our government are abetting. It must end. We must stop it.
That's Chris Hayes. Now, it might be that Chris Hayes is understanding that, hey, this shit is coming to a close. The writing is on the wall. I need to start trying to save my fucking reputation here. And that could be the case for her also here. But I think there's an added thing for Joy-Ann Reid. And that is Joy-Ann Reid's family is from the Congo. Her dad, anyway, I covered that before, but I'll let it play. She's talking here about Nikki and what she says about what's happening in Palestine.
Okay, here was Nikki Haley, supposedly the Republicans' moderate alternative to Trump, talking about Israel and Gaza. Go.
All right,
when you look now and they talk about a two-state solution, every day that I was at the United Nations, it was never Israel opposing a two-state solution. It was always the Palestinians and Iran opposing a two-state solution. They never wanted that because they want to eliminate Israel altogether. So a two-state solution is not a true conversation because if you've ever talked to them, they don't want it. The Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. What I think Israel should do and what I think America should do, we should support whatever Israel thinks.
That is preposterous. That is
okay,
preposterous.
Let's get into it. Here's a little bit of the history of the Oslo Accords and a couple of clips about who's for it, meaning the peace process, and who's against it. Roll them.
Did you know this peaceful handshake between Israeli and Palestinian leadership was awarded with a Nobel Peace Prize? Yet 30 years later, peace seems like a distant dream.
Ladies and gentlemen, we kindly ask that you remain seated during the document signing.
The first of the Oslo Accords was signed on 13th September 1993 and should have marked the beginning of the end to the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank.
We have been granted the great privilege of witnessing this victory for peace. Just as the Jewish people this week celebrate the dawn of a new year, let us all go from this place to celebrate the dawn of a new era.
After a year of secret meetings in the Norwegian capital Oslo, after which the accords were named, a plan was established for Israel to withdraw from parts in the West Bank and Gaza. Plans were also made to transfer governing duties to a Palestinian interim government, which later resulted in the creation of the Palestinian Authority. Occupied Palestine was divided in three areas. A. Under full Palestinian control. B. Civil control, and Israel and Palestine would have joint security control. And C. Would be under control of Israel except over Palestinians. Both parties were given 5 years to follow up on the plan, and afterwards, negotiations were set to reach permanent decisions on unresolved issues. A year after signing the Oslo Accords, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to former Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat, former Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, and former Prime Minister of Israel Yitzhak Rabin for their efforts to create peace in the Middle East. However, the Oslo peace process quickly entered a cycle of failed negotiations until it ultimately collapsed during the 2000 Camp David summit and the Second Intifada. Afterwards, attempts were made to restart negotiations towards a two-state solution, but they never resulted into conclusive agreements. 30 years later, Palestine is still illegally occupied by Israel, and Israeli settlers frequently construct new settlements in occupied Palestine under protection of the Israeli army. In 2019, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said he would suspend all agreements with Israel after it demolished dozens of Palestinian homes on the outskirts of occupied East Jerusalem. Although Abbas made his threats before without implementing them, in 2020, he also said he would end security agreements with the United States and Israel. And 2022 was the deadliest year for the West Bank since the Second Intifada.
أننا نطالبكم اليوم رسميا ووفقا للقانون الدولي.
Yeah, it speaks in another language, so of course we can't listen to that part. So it's terrible what happened, but let's listen to this. Yeah, that's in another language also. But the point being of the segment, I guess I can take this down. The point being of the segment is that it is very, I don't know if it's surprising or shocking. That might be too strong of a word to call what Chris Hayes and Ann Reid have been recently doing with some of their coverage on Palestine and Israel. It could be just them realizing that I need to go ahead and make this pivot in order to save face for what obviously is going to end terrible, and people are going to be looking at Israel as the culprit, and they need to make sure they're on the right side of that. So this could be just self-interest in why they're doing it this way. So I don't give it any more than that. I'm going to take off. I got to get in hard out on today. One of my daughters has a minimum day, so I'm leaving about 10 minutes earlier than I normally do, but make sure you hit that like button on your way out. I got one super chat. This one here, Progressive, a meaningless branding distinction. And that's a comment came. Thank you for that, Sam. That comment came during the John Fetterman segment, where I think it was a branding exercise for John Fetterman at all. He's not a progressive whatsoever. I leave you with this video from Anthony Blinken.
Israel has been very clear, including as recently as today, that it would welcome returning to a pause in the further release of hostages. The problem was and has been and remains Hamas. They reneged on commitments that they made during the first pause for hostage releases. And the question is whether they are in fact willing to resume this effort. We believe that, as we said from the outset, Israel has not only a right but an obligation to defend itself and to try to make sure that October 7th never happens again. Any other country in the world faced with what Israel suffered on October 7th would do the same thing. What is striking to me is that even as, again, we hear many countries urging the end to this conflict, which we would all like to see, I hear virtually no one demanding of Hamas that it stop hiding behind civilians, that it lay down its arms, that it surrender. This is over tomorrow if Hamas does that. This would have been over a month ago, 6 weeks ago, if Hamas had done that. And how can it be that there are no demands made of the aggressor and only demands made of the victim?